An hour later, Andy and I looked around at the pile of possessions in the hall by the front door. My baby brother looked utterly satisfied and kept reaching over to hold my hand, a smile on his face as he asked me if it was a dream or not. My heart glowed at the fact that I could assure him it was not a dream. Alexander had come up to my brother's room and helped us pack his things and then mine after a short 15 minutes. Looking out the window had shown me my dad getting into his car and speeding off. After that, no one had come to stop us. Stephanie had appeared, but she'd only looked at us with a quiet and guarded expression. It looked to me as if she'd been checking. If the things we packed, we only owe you our things and not any of the valuables. As if she thought we'd steal them. She'd been satisfied about that very quickly and had instead turned her attention on Alexander. Of course, he'd draw her attention with his looks. He looked beautiful enough to fit right in among her many conquests. Her attention to him had pissed Alexander off enough that he'd snapped at her and then excused himself to make a few phone calls from his car. He hadn't come back inside the house yet, but I knew he was waiting right outside. I was, however, a little worried if we'd be able to get everything inside the car. I mean, his car was fast and pretty, but it didn't exactly have enough space. Not for all the bags and boxes. A look at the pile told me it wasn't that much though. I had only 2 bags of clothing and a box filled with books. A small bag filled with some knickknacks and things I'd salvaged from my mother, while Andy had more or less the same amount of bags and boxes. When I opened the door, however, I saw Alexander's car driving away, speeding around the corner. For a moment, I stared at it in shock. Did he just leave me here? Here, let me carry that. Alexander appeared by my side and took the bag and the box I'd been carrying from my arms. He looked at Andy and then winked. You're a strong boy, you don't need any help at all. Waiting for us was Sarah with a bigger and much more practical station wagon. This car could easily hold all 4 of us and our luggage. Hey Brittany, Dennis and I thought this car would come in handy, Sarah greeted me. The car was loaded in no time, and Andy couldn't stop babbling about all kinds of things that he wanted to do and see to Sarah. It was quite obvious that Sarah adored my baby brother as much as I did. As we drove off, I noticed Jennifer standing on the steps at the front door. A look on her face that seemed intrigued, but she waved and sent us a tentative smile when she noticed Andy was waving at her. You know, I feel sorry for her, said Sarah from the back seat. Why? I wondered. Jennifer had never been kind to me, and I had never seen her do anything nice for Andy either. If she hadn't had such a nasty mother, she would have been all right. I can tell, her mind isn't rotten, wrong. Not like Stephanie, Sarah explained. I cast a look at Andy, who stared at Sarah with big eyes. You read minds? He asked in open wonder. Smart as he was, he'd already figured out that that's what she'd been talking about. A lie rose to my lips. Andy didn't need to know these things, did he? Yeah, I can read minds. Want to play a game? You think of something and I'll say what it is, Sarah said to the boy before I could open my mouth. A sound of protest died on my lips when Alexander placed his hand on my knee. Don't worry, agramo kroi. Kids are good with things like this. Best tell them young, they're more accepting at that age. Does he need to know? I asked Alexander softly, knowing that he'd hear with his vampiric hearing, but that Andy wouldn't be able to hear a thing. Not that he was paying attention to me. He was frowning in concentration as he thought of things for Sarah to pick from his mind, laughing loudly every time she got it right. We can't go around pretending to eat food every day, Brit. Gives us terrible indigestion. An amused sparkle in his eyes. He's smart, he'd have figured it out by himself in no time. I nodded slowly, but still I was worried that it would scare him. Vampires and witches. They were always the bad guys in stories. Would it give him nightmares to know he was living with both? Hauser I6 are detail morches have a quit ratting and the cleum. The Moncanic gallants after success with 11 now as a Clitton ding. It was big, and the walls were white, and so were the curtains. But in the corner stood a big bed shaped like a castle. The bed was at the top and could be reached by a ladder, and underneath it was a room lit up with Christmas lights. Andy had stared at it with open-mouthed wonder and rushed to explore the contraption when Sarah told him that was his bed. After that, the 3 of us had spent a few hours unpacking the toys and putting away his clothes. Sarah was currently planning with him seated in the middle of the soft sky blue carpet, planning on what to paint on the walls and picking out the color of the curtains. She'd told me I could go if I wanted. so that I could unpack my own things. Which is why I was currently wandering down the hall, wondering where my bags and boxes had gone, wondering if I was getting my own room or if Alexander wanted to share his. I knew I didn't really want my own room. I much preferred sleeping in his bed curled up in his arms, even though that made me blush a scarlet red as I remembered how Alexander had touched me last night. My very first orgasm? I didn't want to impose though, and decided to search for Alexander when I couldn't find my own things and ask him what he had in mind about the sleeping arrangements. He wasn't in his study or anywhere else downstairs, and I contemplated reaching for him with my mind to ask where he was. I scolded myself. Nothing wrong with a little walking around. This whole telepathy thing was making me lazy. As I passed Andy's new room on my way to Alexander's at the end of the hall, I heard laughter. Sarah was laughing so hard she sounded like she was nearly choking, while Andy was yelling enthusiastically about how he wanted a knight painted on one wall and spaceships on the other. That seemed like a weird mix to me, but if he liked it, I knocked on Alexander's door and was welcomed by a muffled, "Come in, Britt." As I stepped inside, I noticed how his usually tidy room was a complete mess. Clothes of his piled on the bed and my own bags and boxes on the floor in the middle. That wasn't all. He had books and papers scattered around as if a whirlwind had come through. Currently, all I could see from my soulmate was his very scrumptious behind. He was kneeling on the floor by one of the walls, where the roof came sloping down. A panel had been removed to show storage space, and his entire upper body had disappeared inside. No wonder he'd sounded muffled. The sight of such an old vampire, one who'd glowed from the sheer power contained within, on his knees in the dust doing something very mundane, I couldn't hold back the laugh bubbling up inside me. "What are you doing?" A bang that made me wince. He'd obviously hit his head on something, and then he appeared completely, smoothly flowing to his feet, the image slightly spoiled by the hand rubbing a spot on his head and the cobwebs across his shoulders and hair. Stormy gray eyes met mine with a smile. "What does it look like?" "Eh? You're making a huge mess?" I offered, stepping fully into the room and closing the door behind me. He crooked his finger in the universal come-hither motion, and I shrugged and navigated my way through all the obstacles towards him. He met me halfway. "No, I'm cleaning to make space for your things," he said, a bemused look on his handsome face. When we reached each other, his hands immediately settled on my hips and tugged me in closer so he could hug me. "Doesn't look like it, and I don't think so." "You're covered in dust." Stepping sideways, I avoided his embrace. Even though my heartbeat sped up, he wanted to share his room. I hadn't realized I'd been worried about that so much until my body was flooded with relief and happiness at being so wanted by him. A mischievous look appeared in his stormy gray eyes. "No hug?" When I shook my head, he shifted his stance just the slightest bit. That was all the warning I got. Next thing I knew, I was cradled in his arms and then thrown across a wide shoulder. An arm wrapped around my legs, holding me in place while the other started tickling. Laughing and screaming for mercy, I pounded on his back, knowing I couldn't hurt him even if I tried. It was like hitting a brick wall, but I wasn't going to give up without a fight. He threw me on the bed and straddled me, still tickling me with way too fast fingers. "Changed your mind yet?" he asked, pausing his assault. I shook my head, wiping the tears from my eyes. "No way there's cobwebs in your hair." I tried to look disgusted, but the truth was, even with the silvery threads of spiderweb in his hair, it looked silky soft. My fingers itched to hold and pet and stroke. Alexander started tickling again, and I screamed, "Please, stop." He was laughing wickedly down at me, and when I started pushing him off and hitting his chest, he took my wrists with one hand and pinned them above my head effortlessly. "How about a kiss then?" he asked, leaning forward so his breath filtered across my face. I shivered at his gaze. Gone was the mischief, replaced by desire. He wore a look that told me he'd bring me nothing but pleasure if I agreed. I wanted to protest, out of principle, but I couldn't bring my mouth to talk. "Nothing to lose, a grand croix. You're just as dirty as I am now," he said, his voice husky. It made muscles low in my body clench in anticipation, a hot burning pooling low in my abdomen. He made the word dirty sound hot and sexy, dirty in an entirely different way. It had me forgetting all about cobwebs and dust. Arching my back and lifting my head, I managed to brush my lips against his. He responded by melding his lips against mine, letting go off my hands so he could brace himself on one arm, even now mindful not to crush me with his weight. His other hand, he stroked down my body to claim possession of a breast, a growl coming from his lips. Mine, his touch sent my nerve endings into sizzling overload, my back arching off the bed again, pressing my body further into his arms. I wanted to protest against his possessiveness. I was not an object he could own. But the growl had me moaning instead. I loved this possessive male too much to put up much objections anyway, not when he did wicked things like this to my body. Now that my hands were free, I trailed him down the smooth planes of his chest and then tugged at the hem of his shirt. Off. His stormy gray eyes darkened at the words, and I wondered if he thought I was too forward. His next action took away the doubt. He sat up so that he was straddling me and smoothly took off the shirt, a dangerous smirk on his lips. Better? I nodded, biting my lips as I traced his chest with my eyes, loving the well-defined muscles and the soft, pale skin. White, but somehow infused with pink, it made him look touchable and alive instead of cold, like a statue. He didn't move back down. Instead, he allowed me to look to my heart's content. An arrogant smirk on his face that told me he knew exactly what a sight he was. His fingers trailing softly across the exposed skin of my stomach, rubbing soft, infuriating circles that sent hot spikes of pleasure and anticipation through me every time they reached just a little lower. Do I get to take off your shirt too? He wondered, pulling softly on the offending material. I knew I was blushing, but I bit my head and shook my head. What's in it for me? He looked downright devilish as he leaned in, close enough for his lips to brush mine as he spoke. How about pleasure beyond your wildest imagination? I had to bite back a moan as his words alone sent my body into overdrive. I felt so hot that I didn't even think twice about yanking my own shirt over my head, especially at the heated gaze he sent me before he trailed his eyes down to my chest, unashamed and totally possessive. I'm going to bite you right here, he whispered huskily, trailing soft, teasing fingers over the heated skin of my left breast. Then, before I could utter a word, he leaned down and did just that, while his hands moved to stroke the other through my bra, moaning at the contact I gave into my earlier desire to stroke and pet and touch his hair, and did just that, sliding my fingers into the silky strands of coffee-colored hair. Coffee, or rich chocolate. Alexander? I sounded breathy and hoarse. They might hear us. The thought that my baby brother was just down the hall and might hear me moan was not appealing, and I was very sure I'd be moaning loudly in a short moment if I didn't stop him. A tongue teasingly flicked over my nipple, through the thin material of my bra, and I moaned loudly. Oh, I'm sure Sarah can hear us, Alexander said, but he didn't sound in the least worried, his stormy eyes glancing up to look at me teasingly for a moment. I went to push at his shoulders, but I couldn't move him an inch. Instead, he rocked his body a little so that the hard push of his arousal hit me at the seam of my legs, rubbing at the screamingly sensitive nerve ends there. So sensitive, so responsive, he mumbled, sounding very pleased with himself as he repeated the motion, and I let out another breathy moan. No need to worry a gramo croy. Sarah is the only one who can hear us, and she deserves that after what she made me listen to every night since she met Dennis. Alexander was grinning as he rocked his body again, grazing his lips across mine. I stopped pushing against his chest and instead ran my fingers down the smooth skin, raking my nails across just to get a reaction out of him. A husky growl as his body stiffened and I froze in my movements. Did I do something wrong? Don't stop, Britt. That felt good, he ordered. And then he kissed me, nibbling softly on my bottom lip, trailing kisses across my jaw to that sensitive spot just below my ear, and then grazing his teeth across it before suckling softly. I knew that was going to be a hickey again. Feeling delighted that I'd found something he obviously liked, I raked my nails across the skin of his back again, softly, because I didn't want to hurt him, and he groaned and shivered. I'm not made of porcelain, Britt. Harder. This is vampire skin you're dealing with. He stopped what he was doing and just let me run my hands over the skin of his back, his eyes closing as he enjoyed it. He let me do that for several minutes, but I didn't mind. It felt amazing to touch him. I could do this for hours. He didn't move at all, becoming as still as a statue. Leaned forward as he was, with his weight braced on his arms on either side of my head. All I had to do was breath in deeply and my breasts would brush up against him. Suddenly, he sat up and pinned my hands back down above my head. Enough. You can pet me all you want tonight. Then, without further warning, he slid a hand down my body to boldly cut me between my legs. Shocked at the touch and the electrical currents it sent spiraling through me, I bit my lip. Alexander. It was meant to sound stern, but instead came out as another moan. With wicked fingers, he stroked me through my jeans until my eyes rolled back in my head and pleasure exploded inside me. Man was good on his word. He certainly knew how to bring pleasure. He slid off me, his legs over the edge, over the bed as he pulled me into his lap to cradle me against him. "I love you, Brittany," he said huskily, his eyes still dark with lust and a spark in their depths. "I love you too," I told him, my voice unsteady because I was still trying to get my heart rate down and my breathing to even out. I was sure my eyes were all glazed over and hazy, sated as I felt. He chuckled warmly, showing me that male satisfaction again. He was very much pleased with the effect he had on me. We sat like that for a while and then he suddenly put me down on the bed and pulled the edge of a blanket over me. "Rest for a while, you can watch me bring order to this so-called mess. I'm planning to keep you up late tonight." A darkly sensual look cast in my direction that promised me all kinds of wicked things he had in mind. I shivered, my body already responding in anticipation as he brushed his lips across my temple in a gentle kiss. It was nice to watch him work, especially because he hadn't bothered to put his shirt back on. He worked fast, too fast to be human, his hands blurring as he scrolled through stacks of papers. Sometimes it looked like he was even reading, but he moved things so fast that was impossible. Within an hour, he had emptied half his closet, which had mostly been filled with some papers and boxes. Those had all disappeared by now, and most of his clothes had been placed back in the closet and his books back in order on the bookshelves. There was precisely enough space there now for my own books. He held out his hand when he was satisfied to pull me off the bed, smirking as he noticed how I'd pulled his shirt on instead of my own. "There, now you can unpack." That was done so fast that it was almost sad. It looked like I had almost no clothes at all inside the half-empty closet next to Alexander's clothes. The man didn't even have that many things. I was left with the bag of knickknacks I'd salvaged from my mother's things, but I told Alexander to store that behind the panel in the wall too. I didn't feel up to going through that and giving it places. I only took the large seashell from it, the one that was beautiful red and gold and other colors that reminded me of the sunset. Mom and I had found it on the beach right next to our home, and I knew it would fit right in with the things Alexander had collected in his study. He understood my intent right away when I took it out, and he took my hand as he led me down the stairs. I heard no sounds coming from Andy's new room, but as we descended the stairs, I heard his laughter in the living, along with the sounds of a racing game. "There a gramokroy," Alexander whispered in my ear as I placed the precious shell on a spot for display on one of the shelves in the study. "Beautiful. Will you tell me the story behind it?" With a smile, I did just that, my nightmares from this morning all but forgotten. At long last, things were going perfectly. I had a beautiful man that loved me and would always be mine, and my baby brother finally had a home where he'd be loved. In the living, I found Andy playing with Bob and Dennis on the Wii. Kid was laughing so much that his cheeks were red and his eyes wide with mirth. Bob was laughing too. He wasn't even bothering to hide the fangs clearly visible. Shocked, I stared at that, stopping in my tracks. Alexander placed a warm hand on the small of my back and leaned down to my ear. "What's wrong, Britt?" Before I could reply, Andy jumped up and ran over to me, tackling my legs in a tight hug. "I love it here. I love it. I love everyone, Brittany Lee. Is this really going to be home?" "Hell yes, this is home, giant," I told him as I ruffled his golden hair. "I'm glad you approve. You're not sad that it isn't just the two of us." "Of course I don't mind. Did you see that Bob has fangs? Isn't that cool? He says they're real." My brother bounced up and down in excitement before turning around and running back to the game console. "Play?" he offered, waving the controller at me. How could I resist? We played for hours and ate pizza, Dennis ordered. Andy said nothing about the fact that Sarah, Bob, and Alexander didn't eat at all. Everyone felt happy and elated. Andy's smile was so very infective. When the doorbell rang, I thought nothing of it and got up to open the door. It was dark out and rain pelted down in hard, unrelenting force. On the doorstep stood a stunningly beautiful woman, pale skin like the palest rose petals and flaming red hair that clung to her skull wetly in dark curls. She wore dark leather pants that clung to her like a second skin and a leather corset that looked rebellious and sexy. She had eyes so pale that they were almost liquid silver. They looked at me shocked, as if she didn't expect to see me. Is this the Clitton house?" she asked, and her voice sounded sultry. This was a temptress, all right. She knew exactly how to get men to do what she wanted. No doubt about it. I nodded slowly. "Yes, who are you?" I didn't care that I sounded very rude. I just knew that I didn't like her. Deidre. But it wasn't the woman that answered. It was Bob, and he sounded like he'd just seen a ghost.